We've all heard about the Wild West legends, Butch Cassidy, Billy the Kid, Jesse James. But what about an outlaw that was just as badass, went to prison several times, escaped from prison, and the rest of his life is shrouded in a cloud of mystery? And it doesn't end with a fatal gunshot wound either. Oh no, it's far more interesting than that. In the early 1870s, a young man rode into the New Mexico territory with dusty boots and quiet eyes that watched everything. They called him Jesse. Born in either Missouri or Texas in 1853, this is still a matter of debate, Jesse Evans was apparently half Cherokee, was smart and well-read. He'd graduated from the Washington and Lee University in Virginia. So the life of an outlaw was definitely not something he seemed destined to lead. However, through what might seem like poor parental role models, Jesse had his first brush with the law on June 26, 1871 in Elk City, Kansas. Caught in a bust with his own parents, all three were arrested for passing counterfeit money. In 1872, records state that Jesse was released from prison, but there's no mention whatsoever of his parents. And in fact, what happened to his parents after their prison time remains a mystery. As for Jesse, well, there's no mystery about what he did next. He continued onwards and entered the New Mexico territory, all on his Todd. Flying solo, if you will. Jesse initially found work as a cowboy and was employed by several ranches, but soon became friendly with an outlaw called John Kinney. At the time, Kinney was leading one of the more well-known gangs in the New Mexico territory, called the John Kinney Gang. Either through the promise of getting wealthy or the sheer thrill of running against the law, Jesse joined the gang, and he would soon become quite close with Kinney. In December 1875, the Kinney Gang became involved in a disagreement with soldiers of the US Cavalry stationed at Fort Selden. The outlaws left the saloon bruised and battered, and their pride hurt. But they weren't going to let this go. They soon returned, armed and angry. Bullets flew. People died. And it seemed that Jesse was developing a taste for trouble. And along with fellow gang member Samuel Blanton, he shot and killed a certain Quanino Fletcher during an altercation in Las Cruces. Jesse was apprehended soon after and stood trial for the murder, and somehow managed to get himself acquitted. Jesse was undaunted. In fact, being surrounded by chaos and bloodshed was giving Jesse a growing sense of ambition, and so he decided to break away from the Kinney Gang and start his own posse. He started with simple rustling, livestock theft, which is pretty harmless enough by outlaw standards. But Jesse would soon take it to a whole new level. This wasn't just about a few cows. He was going to create a whole network, a syndicate, and one that swept across the whole New Mexico territory. And Jesse's gang were given the moniker The Boys. Men like Buffalo Bill Spawn, Frank Baker, and Jim McDaniels had all left Kinney's gang to follow Jesse. Make no mistake, Jesse was now the main man. And this newfound confidence didn't go unnoticed in Lincoln County. Yeah, this particular county in New Mexico was a lawless war zone in waiting. Two factions vying for power: the Old Guard, led by James Dolan and Lawrence Murphy, crooked Irish merchants with a stranglehold on trade, and the New Blood, Alexander McSween and John Tuntol, trying to carve a piece of justice out of a land soaked in corruption. And Jesse Evans, well, he had to pick a side, and he chose for Murphy and Dolan. You see, the famous Lincoln County War wasn't a war in the traditional sense. No uniforms, no rules. Oh no. Just bullets, grudges, and backstabbing deals in dark rooms. Jesse became the hired gun of Dolan's empire, and he didn't hesitate. February 1878. John Tuntol, a 24-year-old English-born rancher, unarmed, riding alongside his men, was gunned down by Jesse and his boys. Shot in cold blood. That was the spark. A newly formed posse called the Regulators swore vengeance, and they soon obtained their legality from the authority of the Justice of the Peace of the town of Lincoln, John B. Wilson. Wilson issued warrants for the arrests of John Tunstall's killers. The Regulators, that included none other than a particular Billy the Kid, had only one mission: bring Jesse and the Murphy-Dolan faction to justice. The Lincoln County War and the Regulators would soon launch Billy the Kid to everlasting fame. And so in the summer of 1878, this corner of the New Mexico Territory became a place where lawmen were outgunned, judges were bought, and the only justice came at the end of a six-shooter. Jesse Evans and Billy the Kid, two sides of the same bloody coin, circling each other like wolves with revolvers. The tension in the air, like a thunderstorm waiting to snap. The climax, the 5-day Battle of Lincoln. July 1878. Gunfire erupted in the streets. McSween was killed. His house burned to the ground. As the fiery embers of the Lincoln War settled, the West began to shift, and the Regulators disbanded, with Billy the Kid going his own way, soon to become a legend. As for Jesse, he kept rustling, and he kept killing, which of course would land him in more hot water. After a violent gun battle with Texas Rangers, Jesse was arrested, tried, and sentenced to prison. But ever the pragmatist, he managed a daring escape while on work detail one day, only to be recaptured a few months later. But this time, he was sent to the Huntsville prison, and he would remain there until 1882, which seems like a relatively short time in prison for murder, doesn't it? Whatever. On his release, Jesse Evans walked out into the broad daylight and was never heard or seen from ever again. Absolutely nothing. No mention in dispatches, no more sightings. He'd just gone. It was as if Jesse Evans had purposely not wanted to be remembered. And so, as the years went by, his name would rarely pop up in books or movies celebrating the Wild West. He would become a forgotten shadow of the old frontier. But that's not quite the entire story. There's a surprising bookend to the tale of Jesse Evans. In 1948, an estate in North Dakota belonging to the long-lost brother of Jesse Evans needed to be settled. It was then that a man living in Florida contacted the authorities. A probate investigator from St. Louis was sent to investigate. An elderly man called Joe Hines claimed to be none other than the Jesse Evans, and he revealed that he had been living in Florida for years under an alias. He was also adamant that he was entitled to the estate of his deceased brother. And not only that, he came up with some other controversial stuff, claiming that Billy the Kid and another Lincoln War participant, McDaniels, were also still alive. Morrison was amazed. He was hooked, and went on to do more research to track down Billy and McDaniels. And as for Joe Hines, well, he was able to convince a court that he was indeed the real Jesse Evans, and he was successful in his claim for the estate in North Dakota. Some historians still to this day question if Hines was really Jesse Evans, and I suppose this is something we'll never be sure of. But then again, you wouldn't bet against it, would you? Jesse Evans wasn't a hero, and by all accounts, he didn't care to be famous. But with his outlawing, mysterious disappearance, and contentious reappearance years later, you have to admit, it's one of the most intriguing tales to come out of the gunsmoke and dust of the Old West.